Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Devin Dickinson with Lauren again. And today we're talking about effective hiring, which I think is one of the more important things, if not the most important thing that you'll do as a business leader. And I used to tell people, I've done, I'd like to say, 1,000 interviews. I don't know if that's true or not, but it certainly feels like I've done 1,000 interviews. So I feel like I'm better than average, and I'm not saying that to be overly humble. I'm just saying that because I think people think that you get this sixth sense about you, and that eventually the more interviewing you do, that you're going to be just amazing at it. And I would tell you that there's been studies on this. Some of the best business leaders I've known that I've talked to over the years, we've had conversations about this, and most people would to say, the people who really are, if they were to be honest, they're like, hey, I'm 60% at best, right?
Yeah.
And that's after doing it for a long time. But one of the things I tell people in the interview is I'm like, listen, I take interviewing really seriously. And I tell them because I'm likely going to see you more than I see my wife, right? So first off, I better like you, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a ton of truth to that in interviewing. And I think, kind of just starting there is a great point because I think a lot of times people are like in some ways overthink interviewing and think that there's this weird science. And, I think part of this podcast is to put our feet back on reality and say, listen, nobody really knows ultimately in an interview. So your job is, and the reason why we're doing this isn't to, give you the magic abracadabra word that makes this easy, but it's to teach you some skills and some stuff to look for so that you really avoid the bad interviews, right? The bad hires, because those bad hires are going to really bite you in the butt.
Yeah. So one of the things we were talking about with interviewing, like you mentioned, is it's kind of a weird concept because you're hiring someone that you want to be successful in your company, grow, help build it. And we're doing this after having maybe 2 hours worth of conversations, 3 if you're really doing a long interview process. So there's got a lot you've got to learn about someone in a short period of time. And I wanted to start off with kind of a negative question, which have you ever hired incorrectly or a bad employee? I don't want to say bad employee, made a bad hiring decision.
Yeah, a lot,
Hmm.
right? And I think there's degrees of that though. And I would tell you the degrees of it more for me have fallen on the less around are they good at their job and more around were they a bad like culture fit? Was their character off? Were they toxic? Did they have what is the red flags?
Yeah.
Like the red flags in relationships, right? There's like all these what are the red flags
Yeah.
in interviewing, and it's hard to pick that out in a couple interviews. I've heard some tricks of the trade though. One of the I'll go through some of them that I've learned over the years. What one of them is you have to do like again, it depends what level position you're hiring for, right? Like if it's for a cashier, and you want them to represent the company well, it's an entry level position. You obviously can't invest a ton of time. But I'm
Mhm.
talking about, someone senior, someone that's going to have a lot of responsibility. Like I think you have to go into it with the candidate and let the candidate know from the very beginning that listen, this is going to take some time. This is a process, right?
Mhm.
And first off, I think you're going to see a lot from the candidate right there. If they're like, no, I need to, well, I've got a lot of other offers and they're trying to like push you for some reason, like we're talking life decisions here, right?
Mhm.
If they're treating this as like they need to know by, Friday or they're out,
Yeah.
like they're about to make a life decision within 48 hours,
Mhm.
like there should be some red flags there, right? Like what's the urgency? Like we're trying to make a really big decision on something that I would assume that you're going to value as much as we do.
Mhm.
Like you're going to put your life in here. Hopefully you're not looking at this like, oh, I'm going to be here for 6 months and I just need a paycheck. So let's go. Right.
Yeah.
Like if someone doesn't have that kind of respect for the actual process, then that's a first red flag. And I've seen that over the years where people have like pushed it, and then later on you realize, oh, I should have recognized a little more, like, why were they pushing? What was going on behind the scenes?
Mhm.
What's in their head that they're treating this like a transaction instead of, a very involved, thoughtful decision that you're going to make collectively together.
Mhm.
So that's one of the first things I think is really setting kind of expectations of timeframes and saying, hey, listen, this is going to take a while. I'm going to have a lot of different people talk to you. We don't make quick decisions. We don't make decisions in vacuums.
Mhm.
And next week, such and such person's out. So this is probably going to be at least, 3 weeks. And I think that's pretty reasonable,
Mhm.
kind of as quick as you would want to go on a big decision like this.
Yeah.
And so I think, taking time in the interview process is important. The second thing I would say is I like to do 360 type interviews. And you're going to find out, and I'm going to tell you some red flags you're going to find out right here. We started doing this with our executives. And what I mean by 360 is a lot of times in the interview process, you'll have HR interview them, and then you'll have whoever their direct bosses interview them.
Mhm.
Well, we realized that wasn't enough, right? So what we decided to do is 360. So obviously HR is going to interview them just to get them going, make sure that they meet the general criteria. Second thing is we're going to have their direct supervisor interview them. That's where we start. If the supervisor's like, hey, this is great, let's continue on in the interview process, we'll have typically someone maybe that's adjacent to them, to that supervisor. So here's a scenario. Sales manager likes the person. We might have our marketing director
Mhm.
also interview them.
Someone at the same level position, but
Yeah.
not in that
Yeah.
department.
They will bump shoulders a lot.
Mhm.
Marketing obviously should work with sales, but
Yeah.
it's not going to be a direct supervisor. So we want to see like, okay, are they just sales? Can they work
Yeah.
with other people too? And then this is where some of our interviewees have gotten confused. Then oftentimes we'll have even a peer
Mhm.
interview them. And we're just going to say, hey, and we take the approach that this is as much our decision as it is your decision. And we want you to be very thoughtful. So we're going to have you talk to a peer. And it's going to be an interview, but it's going to be more of a peer-to-peer discussion. So you get a chance to talk to someone who does your job right now
Mhm.
and find out like, hey, how do you like the company? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And we just tell them like, listen, we're an open book.
Mhm.
You can ask this person anything,
Mhm.
right? And so we want them to ask their peer. Now, there's twofold, right? Like we obviously appear that we respect one of the people that
Mhm.
we respect, right? And so hopefully they're going to say good things about the company, but we tell them be very transparent. If there's stuff that you don't like about the company, tell them, right? And then we'll circle back up with the peer, right? And say, hey, how did that go? And they're going to, because typically in this scenario, you're going to see a few things happen. Either A, you're really gonna see this like vibing,
Mhm.
like, oh man, that's gonna be my road dog, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
please hire her, please hire him, right? You hear stuff like that, right? And to me, that means a ton.
Mhm.
I want that. Like, that's when you know you got like someone that's like vibing, right? It's super
Mhm.
good. Or you're gonna hear stuff because they are tend to be a little more open. You're gonna be like, I don't know. I'm not sure that, all those stuff that the person was asking about that they seemed concerned about, like, that's our day job. That's what we
Yeah.
do day in and day out. And they seem to have some reservation here. Or all they asked me about is how many weeks a year I get off,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff like that, right? And so, like, you'll really get a really interesting response when they do the peer to peer.
Mhm.
And then the last thing we do, and I did this with a CEO, is I had people like I'm sorry, it wasn't a CEO. It was it wasn't a C-level position, but it was like a VP level position. Well, now I had the VP interview with other VPs, had the VP interview with the person above them, but then I had a direct report to the VP interview the VP.
Okay.
And like this, if you have the right attitude about it, the right spirit, like, you're going to love this, right?
Mhm.
Like, you should love this. Like, I want to know who's going to be working for me,
Yeah.
especially if I'm coming in at like a vice president position. I want to know those people they're going to be my direct reports every day. Like, they should jump at that chance, right?
Mhm.
Because they get to know them, and then they get to say, hey, how could I be a good boss, right? And those are the things that you want to hear from the interviewer, right? And so remember, it's going to be even a little intimidating for that person to interview you. But like, this particular person was like, why are they interviewing me? Like,
Mhm.
in literally, that's exactly what they said with that tonation. What is the point of this? Why are they interviewing me?
Mhm.
Like, and we were like, well, never mind. Actually, we're all good.
Yeah.
Well, don't call us. We'll call you. Right?
Mhm.
It was like this real transparency of like what comes out and how they treat people that report to them.
Mhm.
But, we have had it times where people have interviewed it, and, they get to find out like, hey, wow, I didn't realize the people that you had, and then when we go back and we re-interview them, we have real discussions about, hey, what did you think about your peers? What do you think about that? What do you think about the team that's going to be reporting to you? And now we can, even if it goes well, but we get to have even more engaging level conversations at the next interview process. And so again, kind of drawing this out, giving it time frames, having a lot of different people interview them, is key. And then the last one, especially for high levels, and someone taught me this, and I don't know how I never thought of it before. They said, but hey, if you're getting super serious, like even in today's day and age, if it's a high level person, you have to do it face to face, and you have to do it over lunch or early dinner.
Mhm.
And he said, and I recommend early dinner with cocktails.
Mhm.
And he said, because at this point, you kind of should know them.
Mhm.
They're probably feeling pretty comfortable. You just paid for them to fly there.
Yeah.
They're probably starting to feel like, hey, I've got this job. And if they have a glass of wine in them, you're going to get to see a little bit more about kind of what's underneath the skin,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I've done this several times. And every time it has been eye opening. And a lot of times in good ways, right? Like, but one time I had already made the offer, and then we went out to dinner, and this gal had like two cocktails, and I was literally going, we made a mistake.
Uh-huh.
Absolute. And it was a mistake.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, so mad. I'm like, dumb, dumb, dumb. I know better. I know better. I know better. And so anyways, I'm like, I'm never making that mistake again. So, anyways, there's some general things to think about, just kind of with the process and how to do it. And it's a little unconventional. Like I said, the 360 interviews throw people off sometimes, but that's good. I want it to throw people off, right?
Yeah.
The telling people, hey, like, we're not in a rush and we don't want you to be in a rush. Like, it shows, it will throw people a little bit, but it also kind of shows like, wait, this is a big decision.
Yeah.
And you'll see how they react, right? You'll see whether, like I said, if they're treating it transactional,
Mhm.
something for you to think about.
Yeah. Also shows like we're not in a rush. I mean, I think a lot of people like immediate gratification. So it shows just their character too of like, let's say it's not going according to how they want it to go or the timeline they want. What's their reaction? What's their, how do they bounce back from something like
Lauren, that's exactly right, right? Like, because, like, and then change, right? Like, how do they handle change management, right? Like, is again, we're not trying to fit in your box. You have to fit in our box,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, I I mentioned, I think in every podcast we filmed lately, one of my mentors, David,
Mhm.
he had we were interviewing a CEO together. He and I were both interviewing him, and the guy was like dynamic,
Mhm.
absolutely dynamic, and I was enamored with him, and David liked him a lot too, and we thought this could be our man, right? But it was very much like he was super bold, and he's like, great, so do I have the job? And I like laugh in the middle of the interview. I'm like, it's a seat, you're a CEO, right? Like, we'll let you. I mean, this is like a month long process, right? Like, and he's like, and he was kind of irritated because I think he thought really highly of himself. So again, I was like, okay with that in general, that like, okay, he thinks I should be so enamored that like I should give him the job. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt on that. But then we started putting him through the process. And again, we're talking to CEO, right? Like, and so there's this personality test we have them take. And it's probably like it's significant. It probably took me like an hour and a half to fill it out. Like it was a significant test. Might have even been 2 hours. And we're like, well, the next step is the personality test. And he's like, he's like, basically like, shouldn't I be like number one? Like, why aren't you bowing down to me?
Yeah.
And me, I was just kind of the first time I was doing like CEO type interviews. And I'm like, David, like, we're like, no, we don't want to let this guy get away. And David's like, prima donna much, you know? And he's like, no, this guy's he's going to do our process.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. And then sure enough, the guy blew up, right? Like he couldn't even like last a week, much less that month-long process. So it's like, yeah, you're not gonna be able to play by our rules if you don't play by our rules.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So actually, I pulled some numbers from a survey done by a HR company on toxic coworkers. And results were, when there's a toxic coworker, 50% of employees spend less time at work. 38% intentionally reduced the quality of their work. 25% took out their frustrations of a coworker on the customers, and 12% ended up leaving their jobs entirely. So it kind of shows the impact of a negative person in the workplace. So the question I wanted to ask you about with interviews is, what traits do you look for in an interview to see, we obviously don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but to get the good feeling that this is probably going to be a good hire?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Lauren. In another podcast, I talk about how there's kind of different phases of your company. And I think in the early phases of your company, you're looking for something a little bit different than you are when your company becomes more developed and more employees and bigger. And what I mean by that is, in the earlier phases of the company, you're really looking for people that are little more of a Swiss Army knife, very open to change, very like attitude driven, maybe even more than specific talents, especially in the early phases of your company. Because in the early phases of your company, you need lots of hardworking bodies that can do lots of different things and don't mind, one day doing this job and the next day doing that job.
Yeah.
Because there's only 3 of you or 4 or 5 of you, right? So like this person's going to have to be willing to take out the trash one minute, plan a, Christmas party the next minute.
Yeah.
Go talk to a customer the next minute. And then, do collections on a Friday, right? When your finance person's out, right? Like, so in the beginning, you're kind of looking for people that in my mind have this kind of great attitude, Swiss Army knife of skill sets, and versatile, right? And also very, very open to change. As your company becomes more and more developed, I think you're going to start to look for people with very specific skill sets. And those type of folks, you might not need them to be as personable and people that bounce around ever. Like I always say, like, listen, your best developers, like when they're in an interview, they're not going to make eye contact with you, right? Like that, like your people who can like program like amazing, aren't going to laugh at your jokes, right? They don't want to come into the office, right?
Yeah.
They want to work at 2 a.m., right? Like they're not going to necessarily fit your culture, right? And they sure as heck aren't going to make a collection call on a Friday afternoon, right? So I think there's this, first off, is you understanding the evolution of the cycle, what you're looking for. But let's say you are a more developed part of the interviewing process, or your company's at a more developed, and you need people for very specific roles. Okay. So I think when you need people for very specific roles, what you need to do is first off, have the job spec. If you won't take the time to write out a real job spec, don't waste your money on hiring somebody, right? If you're too busy to create a good job spec, like you're too busy, period, right? Like don't go to the next phase of business and because you're about to put their life in your hands. If you can't clearly define on a piece of paper what their job is, you're not taking their life serious enough and you're not taking this hire serious enough.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't even need to hire, right?
Mhm.
And we've done that before where we just got the discipline where we went through and we created a very specific job spec. And then we started looking at it and we go, you know what, actually we don't need this, right? Because when we started looking at it, we're like, if they do this, in order to do this, this, and this, we don't even have these other pieces built. So we're putting the cart before the horse, you know? So there's a ton of wisdom and discipline around doing the job spec. And then once you have the job spec and you're, not only you, but a couple other people, the people that they're going to work for or whomever else, sign off on that job spec and go, yes, this makes sense. We're willing to pay X amount of dollars for this job spec. We feel great about it. The time is now. Let's interview. Let's hire. Then great. That's step one. Step two is now we're going to interview. And now what I consider, there's a few things. There's about 4 things that I look for in that interview. And the first is their competency against that job spec. Okay. So we talked about developers, right? Developers, if you write a very clear job spec, it should be very clear whether they have those certifications.
Yeah.
Whether they've done that, whether they code in that language, right? Like all of these different things are very clear in the job spec. Do they have the core competencies? I always use the example of like, I have a great attitude. I'm very ambitious. I'm probably pretty good in an interview. But if you write up that I have to be an ASE certified mechanic and you write the job spec for that, you're not going to hire me. And you should be really grateful that you did, because I could come in and have the best attitude ever and could work my butt off and I'm going to break every car I touch.
Yeah.
Right. Like I have zero mechanical aptitude. And like, so when you start the interview process, it always starts of those core competencies. Do they have the core competencies and experience to do what this job spec says? And so you interview very hard for that, regardless if you like the person or not, right? You're not there yet, right? This is not an interview of, do I like them? Do I not like them? This is an interview of, do they have the core competencies? Okay. Once you cross that bridge and you go, thumbs up, this person has those core competencies. Great. Now we're going to a few of the 3 intangibles, right? And I think if they have the core competencies, they can do the job.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's talk about whether there's someone that you want to work with, right? This is where I get down to the point of like, hey, I'm going to see you more than I see my wife.
Yeah.
Right? Let's make sure we want to work together, right? Because at our company, there's 3 things that I think make for someone to be successful. And I think this is pretty universal. But if they have the core competencies, the next thing I want to know is what's their attitude like? Okay. I'm sorry. What's their attitude like? The next thing I want to know is, are they teachable? Right? Are they teachable? And then the third thing is, I want to know, are they hardworking? Okay. So here's what you can't do is say, so Lauren, looks like you have all the core competencies.
Yeah.
Do you have a good attitude?
I have a great attitude.
Oh, perfect. She's got a great attitude. Lauren, are you a hard worker?
I'm incredibly hard worker.
Hard worker, great. And then what was the other one I said?
Coach. Or teachable.
Yeah. Hey, are you teachable?
Super, super teachable.
Oh, we're hiring Lauren. Boom. Short interview. Wow.
Yay. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right. Like, I'm sure you're kind of chuckling to yourself, right? But this is difficult because, like, how do you figure out if they have a great attitude? How can you tell if they're hardworking? How can you tell if they're coachable? And so this is what I've started to learn over the years and what I want to dig into.
Yeah, especially because everybody goes into an interview knowing I've got to sell myself.
Yep.
I'm going to sell myself and I know exactly what they're looking for. It's that age-old thing, like what's your worst trait, or what's your and it's like, well, I work too hard, or and it's like, okay, like everybody knows the answer that they think people are looking for. What questions do you really ask?
My worst trait is I care too much.
Yeah, I care too much,
Yeah, Michael Scott. Yeah.
So what questions do you ask to kind of dig in deeper, get a true sense of
Yeah.
who this person is?
So I think, let's start with the hardworking one because I think this one I've gotten pretty good at over the years.
Mhm.
And so what I want to do is I want to say like, oh, I don't ask them, are they hardworking, right? I tell them like, hey, I'll ask about like their career at first. I'll be like, so at your other job, what was like the most challenging thing for you to kind of learn and overcome? And how did that go for you?
Mhm.
And then you'll hear things like, I don't know, like it was just a job, right? Or something like that. Or like, oh my gosh, at my other job, I started in this position, then I got promoted to this position, but I had no idea what I was doing. But evidently, after 6 months, I did a good job and they promoted me to this position, right? And so
Mhm.
you can start to hear the stories and think
Yeah.
like, oh, well, they put me in, this new department
Mhm.
that didn't even exist, and they just told me to figure it out. And like 3 months later, there was two of us there, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're going, okay,
Versus, and now I'm here interviewing.
yeah,
And
right,
you're like, I probably didn't figure it out.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So you see like these things where like they like to take on challenges, right, at their other job, or like why even like why are you leaving your other job? And you find out, what, actually it just like the pay is good and they like me and I don't like it was a fine job. I can't really be promoted anymore, and I'm not even challenged anymore. I've done the same thing now for a couple years, and I talk to them, but like there's just no the company's kind of flat, and there's
Yeah.
no, and so you're going, okay, this person like seems like they're striving for more, right? They're not trying to find. So many people are trying to find that like, they wanna find something where they can just be complacent.
Mhm.
For me, that doesn't fit in our companies, right?
Yeah.
We're looking for people that are always trying to grow. Now, they might start to reach a ceiling, but we want people that are trying to grow and have that hardworking attitude. And so, the next thing I'll do is I'll ask them, "Tell me about, like, what you do with your free time,"
Mhm.
right? And it's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so busy." Like, right now, I volunteer at my church, and then, man, I love that, but I can only, I'm already doing like Wednesday night and Sunday morning, and then they're like, and I have, two kids, and I'm running them around to all their sports, but I love to work out. I try to work out 5 times a week, but last week I was only able to work out 3 times,
Mhm.
and then and I'm on the PTA, right? And all of a sudden you're like, okay, this person is like not looking to find easy street.
Yeah. Mhm.
They're
They challenge themselves
they're
or they yeah.
challenging. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was before that we were talking about this. There was one person that I interviewed him. They're like, well, I was like, so what do you do in your free time? They're like, well, I do triathlons. Like, I've done a triathlon. I don't do triathlons,
Mhm.
right? I was like,
Yeah.
okay, you're hired, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was trying to figure out if they were hardworking. I'm like, you're hired, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
you can just see people that like are hardworking. They're trying to challenge themselves. So
Mhm.
I think you can get there pretty quickly when you find out and you say, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And they're like, "I just watched the Game of Thrones for the fourth time through." Right? It's like, okay, that's what 378 hours or
Yeah.
whatever of TV, right? But like you think about this and like you get answers like this. Here's a funny one. This is one of my all time favorite stories. I forgot about this until right now. I, I was interviewing someone and he's like, okay, I was like thinking this person, I'm 50-50 on them,
Mhm.
and then they're like, in all seriousness, they stopped me and they're like, I just need to let you know, and this is like May,
Mhm.
that in July, I'm going to need 6 weeks off. Now, that's not uncommon,
Mhm.
right? Like, there's a scenario, right? Like, my mother's getting a surgery. I'm
Yeah.
the only child. I need to be there, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm getting married and I promised my wife this honeymoon and we've
Mhm.
already paid for it and I didn't think I'd be getting a job
Yeah.
So like I was like maybe we could consider that. Tell me what's going on. I'm expecting to hear about, the mom's
Yeah.
surgery. And he says, "Well, I just got the apprentice to the lead archer at the medieval or wait, not medieval times.
Renaissance
Renaissance fair." He's like, he wasn't even the head archer. He was the apprentice
apprentice.
archer. And I was like, yeah, we'll call you. Thanks,
Yeah.
bud.
Yeah.
I was like, So I was like, I pretty much know like the hardworking thing. We're kind of out the door.
Yeah,
So
exactly. He has other priorities or yeah.
red flag. Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about the attitude too.
Yeah.
And I think attitude's funny, right? Because they're looking for a new job, most likely. Like very, very rarely are you getting the person that's the first time career, right?
Yeah.
And so they're looking for this new job. And so there's a reason they're leaving the old job, right? And so really I like to dig in there, right? Like what's going on at your current position? And I think that's where you find out stuff about attitude, right?
Yeah.
And so you say things like, "Oh, why are you leaving your current position?" And you'll get a myriad of answers. Sometimes people polish that really well. But a lot of times I think you just flat out ask that and you're going to get some insight.
Yeah.
But if you kind of like, that question, the answer was too vague or too polished, you're like,
Yeah.
I'm going to dig in a little further. And so what I'd like to do then is say things like, so tell me about who your favorite boss was. Right. And if they're like, ooh, that's a tough one. I had Jill. I love Jill. And I love Bob too. And right. And they're like going through all their favorite people that were their bosses. They're like, okay, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Or the flip side, they're like, my favorite boss? I don't know if I've ever liked any of my bosses. Right. Like,
Yeah.
Right. Or like you can kind of go, oh, well, let me tell you who my least favorite boss is, right? But you start them off on who's your favorite boss, right?
Yeah.
So you get them talking, you find out why they were their favorite boss. They're like, oh, it's my favorite boss because we'd go out drinking every, Thursday, and he always bought, and he was so fun. And like, the head boss, when the head boss was away, he'd give us days off or whatever.
Yeah.
You kind of like, you get a lot of insight when you say, hey, what's your favorite person you ever worked for? They start talking about what they like and what motivates them and what they think a good boss even looks like, right? But sometimes you'll hear things like, oh, my favorite boss, at first we didn't get along, right? But like, I realized this person was just tough on me and they developed me into really great, this, that, and the other, and unfortunately that person left, but like, he's actually one of the people I put on my reference. She's my number one reference today. And you go, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Good answer, right? So you start them off with who's your favorite boss. And then after that, once they start talking, because now they'll start to get loose and they'll get a little more diarrhea of the mouth, right?
Yeah.
You say, who is your least favorite boss? And now they're like, oh, I'm so glad you asked, right? It was Betty, it was Bobby, it was Susie, right? Like, and you're gonna and then you're like, well, why? What did they do? What irritated you? Well, they wanted me to work 8 hours a day. They got on me. I was
They
late.
corrected me too much. You can start to see what those answers are.
Absolutely, right? Like, and you want to know like attitude. You're trying to dig into attitude, right? And then you even say like, who's the favorite, your favorite coworker? What are they going to say when you leave?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, my favorite coworker is the one that we ditch every Wednesday and we cover for each other, whatever, right? Or versus, oh, my favorite coworker is, man, if I get hired, I want you to hire her too, right? Like, she's so good. She's so hardworking, right? And you're going to find that birds of a feather flock together, right? Like, and so you're like, oh my gosh, if I wasn't in President's Club, she was, right? And we were always competing back and forth, but it was friendly competition, right? And you get people talking like that and you'll find out so much about attitude, And so we talked about, core competency. We talked about work ethic. We talked about attitude. And now the next thing I think is so important, especially in, 2024, 2025, right? And that is, are they teachable?
Yeah.
Because like the world has changed so much. Right now we're in this co-working place and there's probably, I don't know, 30 different offices in here. And each one of these offices, if you said, hey, tell me about what your customer service job is here, and then you went from each one, like they're going to be so different.
Yeah.
Businesses are so different nowadays. Whereas, in the 50s and 60s, it's like, manufacturing company, like you could replicate a lot of skill sets, right? Like, so if you were good at this, you'd be good at that, right? If you were good at that, you'll be good at this. Now, I think even if you have the core competencies, say, to do customer service or core competencies to do marketing, at one company, it's going to look so different than another company. So you have to be teachable and open to change. And that sounds easy, but it's not. People generally are resistant to change. People generally like to think that they're teachable, but they're not, right? Because it involves so much humility, right? And especially if you have a good core set of competencies. And so during this interview process, you have to really interview. So imagine interviewing now for a CFO or CEO position, right? Like you've got to find a CFO that's humble and, hey, we do things this certain way at this company. Well, like CFOs are rigid by nature. They're supposed to be rigid, right? Like, no, this is the way it's done. Okay, well, listen, I understand why you say that, but however, we want it to look this way, right? Like, and or a CEO, right? Like, I've been a CEO 3 times. This is my 3rd gig. Are you going to tell me how to do my job?
Yeah.
Yeah, I am going to tell you how to do your job because this company is nothing like that company, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to find people, and it's very difficult the higher up you go to find people with humility that are teachable. And I have failed this many times at the higher level because they have great core competencies. They're incredible workers, right? These people generally, at this higher level, they're not afraid to work.
Yeah.
They also have a great attitude, right? They're a leader. In an interview, they can say some really cool things, right? Like, so you're now down to, are they teachable? And this is why we're going this one last, because this is difficult, because they could nail the other ones, but if they're not teachable and open to change for the way that you do your company, it's going to be a disaster.
So what kind of questions would you ask?
Yeah, I can tell you one that I asked that I didn't listen to my red flag. It was a CEO, exactly what I was talking about, person incredibly talented. The resume was, impeccable, right? Like references, unbelievable. You could look at the resume and be like, yeah, just hire him, right? Why do you ever need to interview? But I did the interview and we were actually at lunch, right? And he'd had a drink or whatever. And I said, so, because I was trying to dig into this. And I was like, so, what kind of books or podcasts do you listen to, like as a CEO, that kind of constantly challenge you? And he goes, I don't really do that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person is an egomaniac and I should not hire him. And he was an egomaniac and I shouldn't have hired him. Probably the worst hire I've ever made, period, out of any company, anywhere, ever, period. And it was because he was an absolute egomaniac, absolutely unwilling to change, knew everything, wouldn't even listen to me as an owner, wouldn't listen to the board of directors because he knew everything. And he was an absolute nightmare. And so I think trying to dig into things like, hey, asking them things like, tell me about, how you feel about, or things in your company that's changed over the years. Like, how long have you been there? And they're like, oh, I've been there 10 years. Tell me what was the hardest thing for you to adapt to, right? And if they're like, oh my gosh, well, I had this new boss and it took me like 2 years for us to see eye to eye, right? Or, the company got sold and, I didn't, they wanted us to do things a different way and that was just the wrong thing to do, right? And like, I think trying to dig into those moments of transition or change for people. And again, especially as they get older and more mature in business, like for me, it's hard for me because I've done the same thing in a lot of different ways. And so I have to constantly remind myself that I have to be evolving and changing. And I'd love to tell you that I'm good at it and I'm probably better than most. But like in my company, I'm the only person who doesn't have like Salesforce,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I just haven't learned it. Won't take the time to learn it,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's me, and I think I'm pretty open to change,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but like they still send like me screenshots, so I can just hear,
Yeah.
right? But I'm like, so like you've got to realize that people will start to, have these, moments where like they become unteachable. Even if they were teachable at one point, they start to become
You're
unteachable. They don't
exactly
like change.
Yeah. So, I want to ask you about a quote I see quite often, and that's Dave Ramsey. He likes to ask, "How do you motivate employees?"
Yeah.
And his answer is, "You don't. You hire motivated employees, or you hire motivated people." What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know where he's coming from,
Hmm.
right? And he has a ton of wisdom. I would never um, openly disagree with Dave 'cause I
Hmm.
think he's a super wise
Yeah.
guy. But I'm going to challenge his thinking on that a little
Hmm.
bit because I slightly disagree, or I'll push back on that thought. I think it's great. Like during the interview process, you want to find motivated
Yeah.
people. But I think there's a cop out to that as well. It basically says, well, I'm not the problem. They're the problem. They're just not motivated. No,
Hmm.
because like everybody needs motivation. And I think about like people that I coach, right? Like
Hmm.
there's people on my team that are like extremely motivated, right? But like, do I have 11 of them that are going to start that all have the core
Yeah.
competencies and skill set? No. Sometimes you're dealt the hand that you're dealt, right?
Hmm.
And to be able to say, well, it's not my fault. They're just not motivated. Well, it does fall on you. Like
Hmm.
you're the leader, you want to hire people that have the ability to be motivated, but you better cast vision and you better be able to motivate people as a leader. I think it's a cop out to say, well, we just didn't hire right. We didn't hire someone who's motivated. I think that's a
Yeah.
cop out.
Hmm.
And I would challenge that and say a great leader is going to get the best out of people, is going to cast vision. And that in turn takes the people who are already motivated and just supercharges them.
Hmm.
And the people who maybe like are a little more in neutral, it gets them motivated, right?
Yeah.
And so I know what he's getting at, and what he's getting at is try to find those folks that are motivated. I call it hardworking
Hmm.
in the interview process. So I agree with that. But at the end of the day, you can't just like buy the perfect robot.
Yeah.
There's a people that I mentor in business and that come to mind where I've had this conversation over and over with them. I'm like, hiring is one of the most important things that you're going to do, but it is not like they're not going to save you. If you think making this perfect hire is going to save or revolutionize your company, that's like you're trying to buy the perfect robot. You don't get to buy the perfect robot. You don't buy this and out of the box this person just comes and saves your company.
Hmm.
You kind of build the perfect robot, right?
Hmm.
Like that I hear coaches talk about all the time, like, well, if I just, had a left back, or I'm just missing like three positions. If I had these three positions filled, we'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the team you got.
Yeah.
So figure out how to get the best out of those people and do it, right? Like, and that's what I said, like, you can't buy a perfect robot. You've got to build it. You've got to motivate people, and nobody's perfect.
Hmm.
Like, you're not the perfect CEO. You're not the perfect business owner. You're not the perfect leader. Whatever it is, you're not perfect. You have to constantly evolve, and hopefully you have somebody mentor and train and grow you. And just like that, you've got to do that for your people.
Hmm.
And so I think it's a bit of a cop out to say, well, nope, you just hire the motivated. I think it's
Yeah.
kind of a
It's
cop
got to
out.
be a two-way
Yeah.
street. Before we end here, I want to ask you, what other best practices do you have when it comes to hiring that maybe we haven't talked about?
I really feel like, it's one of those things where um I earlier I talked about time, right? I think slowing them down is important, but before you even get to the hiring process, I really encourage you to spend a lot of time and prayer and thought behind it because, I talked about if you can't build like the job spec, don't hire. But even before that, like oftentimes people hire too early.
Mhm.
I 100% believe that's true. People, you'll hear people all the time saying like, "No, we hired too late." I've rarely seen that to be true.
Mhm.
Most of the time, I see people hire too early. They hire when the company is not ready for that person yet, right?
Mhm.
They hire when, you know, frankly, it's kind of not financially prudent.
Mhm.
The job spec's not completely developed out. And I think, you've heard me say this in other podcasts. If it's a good decision today, it's a great decision in 6 months.
Mhm.
And again, we're talking about not only your company and your livelihood, but that person's, like, they're putting their faith in you.
Yeah.
They're putting their children's faith, their spouse's faith. They're putting that faith in you, right? And they're believing that if they take this on, that not only is the company going to be there, not only is your position going to be sustainable, but that you're going to be able to grow, right?
Mhm.
And so people want that and they believe that. And so I think the biggest advice I would give people is do it slowly. Set parameters. If you think you need it today, wait
Mhm.
just a little bit. You know, maybe go to everybody on the team and say, hey guys, I think we need this position, but can we reevaluate this next quarter? And if we still need it, then let's go fill it.
Mhm.
But going slow, like people, generally make way less mistakes. And I think it's so tragic when you see someone leave one good opportunity, come to a company, and then 6 months later, the position goes away. It's not what they thought it was,
Mhm.
all of these different expectations where it just hadn't been thought through all the way. And again, I speak from mistakes, life experience on myself where we've made those mistakes. And it is heartbreaking, right? It's
Mhm.
heartbreaking to be part of that. And so I would advise really against it. And so thanks for asking that question because I think it's super important.
Nice. Very good.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, this was a fun podcast. Hiring is important. It's probably, like I said, at the start of this, one of the most important things that you're going to do as a leader within your company, and taking the time to do it right and developing this skill set and not winging it is would be my advice to you. So, I hope you not just listened to this, but you took some notes and learned how to apply it to your company.